The only thing you have to remember today for sure is what's on that slide. Okay? So what's on that slide is we can do 100% fossil-free energy. It's not only possible, it's practical. We can do it in 10 years or less and profitably today, meaning at no additional cost to the ratepayers. So do not accept the mythology that to go green is more expensive than to stay dirty. In fact, the opposite is true. And I think most of the people in this room probably know that. So everybody knows the present crisis. I'm not going to take a lot of time because I think you're probably up on this. And if you see that line there, that's actually a fairly accurate depiction of where we are with CO2. If you look at it in a concentrated way, it becomes a hockey stick. That's the famous Gore hockey stick. And what this is here, which you don't ever see, that line is what's called the methane accelerator. So right now, the worst problem on planet Earth destroying the biosphere is not CO2. It used to be. What's happened is that CO2 has created so much warming. As you know, we're probably around 407 parts per million. 350 if you believe Bill McKibben, and I think he's absolutely correct. 350 is the max you can go. We're climbing every day, and that 407 is ambient as measured on the top of a mountain in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So if it's 407 there, it's more than that in this room. And it's the ambient. Well, the problem is that's caused permafrost to melt. And enormous amounts of methane are now being off-gassed. Some parts of Siberia, the amount of off-gassing of methane is so enormous, it looks like shells exploded in the snow. And that's not the biggest part of the problem. The biggest part of the problem is what's under the ocean, what are called the hydrate structures. We are now off-gassing massive amounts of hydrogen out of the oceans. First detectable leak was about 13 years ago. It's accelerated. It's worst in the Arctic because we had a 7.5 degree switch in temperature this year in the Arctic. There's a 2,000-mile long rift along the entire Atlantic seaboard, all leaking. And just to give you some idea why that's a problem, 325 million years ago this happened. And we give that event is called the Permian extinction. So if you go look up Permian extinction, 325 million years ago, a methane belch occurred, which destroyed 95% of all living organisms on the planet under the water and on land. 95%. So we're not talking about a great survivability ratio here, okay? Now, why am I telling you that? Because I want to also leave you with one other thought, and then I'll go into the presentation. I have never, ever, ever heard of a problem, seen a problem, read about a problem, and I read a lot, that we cannot solve with today's technology and resources, period. We have the ability to solve it, including methane. The question is, why haven't we chosen to do it? It's a lack of will. It's volitional. So what I'm going to show you today is just take one little chunk of that problem, which is California, show you one opportunity, and I'll give you a punchline that I should have done a slide and I decided I'm going to just tell you up front. What you're going to hear about, microgrids, some of you know about. Prime Minister Modi of India, on urging by myself and some other people before he got elected, decided to try out 6 microgrids in India. They're overwhelmingly successful, as defined by cheaper cost of energy, energy at villages that never would have had energy otherwise, because the wire was not coming, the transmission wire was not coming, and replicable, scalable. So what Modi has now decided is the way to get out of his coal addiction is by using microgrids. And that's what we're proposing for California. So when you see this California solution, this is global in implication. Our job in California is to demonstrate what's possible, and that will give people the will. See, once they see it can be done, then they can choose to do it. Right now, the cynicism is, oh my God, what do we do? It's too big for me to deal with. So let's get on with it. You all saw what happened with Harvey, Irma. You know, what's interesting, that during the same exact time that Harvey was happening, over 9,000 people died in Asia from extensive flooding. Didn't even make the news. Okay? That's how severe it is and how global it is. And what can we do? Well, when facing climate change, the outcome of inaction is inevitability and well known. I just told you about the permanent extinction. Okay? So not acting is not an option. The opportunity to co-create the positive future we're looking for is within our grasp. What we didn't realize is that it was within our grasp. And so the question then becomes, so what do you choose? Well, first of all, we believe achieving 100% zero carbon energy in 10 years is not only possible at no additional cost to the ratepayers, at no additional cost to the ratepayers. That's one of the things you have to keep reminding your elected officials. What's really blocking it are entrenched economic interests. I'm the founding president of the World Business Academy. Our commitment is to help business become better stewards for society. We've been doing it for 30 years. And one of the things we like to do is to demonstrate that there are business people who are capable of making the same calculations that PG&E is, that Edison is, and that Exxon is. And giving those calculations to the elected officials if they want to hear. What we're not capable of is drowning them in contributions. So for that, we need the public to be aware of the solutions, and then they can implement them. So what are microgrids? Well, they're local. The beauty of a microgrid is you can build it for as small as one office park, or the largest one I've designed is for 100,000 people in the county of Santa Barbara. Typically, they're anywhere from 15 to 50,000 people. Now, when you maximize distributed energy production, which is solar, wind, geothermal, and storage, okay, when you maximize that in a microgrid configuration, what you do is you open up, you leverage the existing infrastructure. Here's what I mean by that. If you efficiently take and use the energy source that's most prevalent in the area where you want to use the energy, so distributed energy creation. If you're in Eureka, California, wind makes a lot of sense. If you're in Lompoc, wind makes a lot of sense. If you're in Santa Barbara, where I live, it makes no sense at all. There's not enough wind. It's solar. Other places, it's geothermal. In some others, and we're now helping one company that's developing what's called kinetic energy, which is a pump and store system using rocks instead of water. So what you want to do is take that cost curve down by starting with what the cost of energy really is, which for solar is about 5 cents per kilowatt. In my community, we pay 19 cents per kilowatt to use it. Where did that 14 cents go? Actually, to no useful purpose. And people in business could easily take that 5-cent energy, mark it up by a couple of cents, pay the guy to create it or the woman to create it, pay for the transmission, deliver it, charge you, and the whole thing could be done for literally substantially less than the 19 cents I'm currently paying. Why doesn't that happen? Because of political will, the lack of political will. So, PG&E and Edison have been around for over 100 years. There isn't a single senator or assemblyman that doesn't get money from PG&E. And the result is, when they do, it clouds their judgment. I don't want to say that it's not that they're improperly taking money under the table, it's that the system works that way. And it takes courage then, or it takes you and me as the public to say, wait a minute, we got to have a different reality. So there are trillions, and I don't mean that in a hyperbolic sense. There are literally trillions of dollars standing poised, waiting for the opportunity to invest in green energy. Not billions, trillions. Because we know that's where it's going, but we can't safely do it yet because the political system won't give us that opportunity, okay? Well, it takes rethinking something that we thought really worked. Take the phone. 1876, Alexander Graham Bell makes a phone call. He uses a copper wire to do it. And lo and behold, we make the assumption that you have to have a copper wire to make a phone call. And as a result, only 23% of the population of the planet Earth had a phone, right? 23%. So that's not very good as of 1970. When we realized that the wire was a good thing in Alexander Graham Bell's time, but no longer in our time, we cut the wire, we went over the air, and as a result, as of today, about 92% of the public has a phone or access to one. So the wire got in the way, even though it was a good technology back in the 1880s. The same thing is true with transmission lines. Transmission lines are the enemy. The wire is the enemy. It's what's keeping us from developing integrated microgrids, and we won't have time to talk about it at a great detail, but they're prone to terrorism, they're in a dilapidated state of repair. To rebuild the one you would need for California, according to my friend Jacobson from Stanford, would take about $1.7 trillion. Why would you do it if you could take that same amount of money and invest in local creation of energy and pump it back and forth between your neighbors? Okay? So, and disasters, of course, look at what's happening. What if you could turn the power on the day after the storm left Puerto Rico? And you could, but not with this, not the way we're going now. So how do we bring the grid in the 21st century? We turn it into microgrids. And basically, this is just a quick drawing showing you how a community microgrid works. Not going to go into it. The best example of an existing microgrid that works, that's proven, is the University of California, San Diego. It saves about $8 million a year in its electrical bill. Notice, it's saving money. It produces 100% of the power for that campus and even produces excess power to feed back to San Diego Gas and Electric when they need it in an emergency. So it's not like this is theoretical anymore. Community microgrids are basically advanced technology. And it does require some very sophisticated software, but that software now exists. It's widely available. And what you can do is create local jobs for building not only the solar cells and the wind farms, but all the infrastructure that goes with it. and build it into what are called linked microgrids, okay? And obviously they're very resilient because every cell in a honeycomb is independent and can withstand pressures from every other cell. So 19th century technology, have wires, bring it from a distance. We are limited right now to about 15% of renewable energy. And what the state is trying to do is to figure out how do you get to 100%. And the way they're doing it is they're saying, well, to add more solar and wind, we have to add what are called peaker plants to make up for what's called the resiliency issue, meaning what happens when the wind doesn't blow and the sun don't shine. Okay? How do you get to 100% green if by definition peaker plants are fossil fuels? And every time you want to add more green, you add more fossil fuel. Quick, what's the math on that? It's impossible. Cannot be done. So it's a laughable goal to say we're going to do that without rethinking our basic assumptions. What are those basic assumptions? Renewables are unlimited. All we needed to do is to figure out how do we store that energy economically in an environmentally sensitive way. But if you can tie microgrids together, which you can, and there's a paper that actually has that drawing in it by my friend Lorenzo Christoph at CAISO, which runs the grid in California. Lorenzo was a big fan of this theory, by the way. You can break all of California from literally two long wires that go down the state transmission grid into microgrids that look like a honeycomb. This is what centralized power looks like today. It's limited by up to 15%. It's called base power, and what it's doing is it's holding us all back from more green. Okay? This is what California microgrids look like visually, in effect. They're using local energy production, and they can create more than 100% of California's existing needs. So then the question becomes storage. Okay? If you produce as much as you can, right now, we curtail, we turn off solar and wind in order that those base power plants, which are 45% dirty, fossil, and nuclear, we turn off the solar and the wind because we don't want to interfere with the base power. It ought to be the other way around. You ought to say, wait a minute, why would I be burning fossil fuel if I could have base power? The grid people will tell you because they don't have what they call a way to balance it. What do we do if we overproduce or underproduce? And the answer is very simply this: hydrogen. We're going to the hydrogen economy. It's on our doorstep. I drive a hydrogen fuel cell car. Anything we excess create in hydrogen, we can turn into our transportation system. China has just decided to convert its bus system into hydrogen buses. This is not Buck Rogers. This is actually yesterday we're finally getting around to. Okay? Now, it's very easy to create hydrogen using excess electricity. You electrolyze it. That's 125-year-old technology. You turn that hydrogen into a gas, and that gas stored, by the way, that's 100% green, I just said, 100% green, and that when you burn that hydrogen, quote unquote, burn it, meaning when you run it through a fuel cell, what you get back is energy, electricity, and water vapor. That's it. Water vapor. My cute little car has a button, I push it, and it takes a relief. It lets go of its excess water. It's quite cute, actually. Okay, now, this is a peaker plant. Peaker plant is basically a jet engine strapped to concrete blocks into which you run natural gas. It is dirty. In fact, it not only does particulate matter, it does very noxious gases. That's what they keep telling us they want to build. I understand that Senator Skinner yesterday said that she never wanted to see another peaker plant. That's what I told the Public Utility Commission 4 years ago, and it made me no friends with the commissioners. I said, we never again should have a peaker plant. You'll never get to green if you keep doing peaker plants. I'm glad that she's on the board with that. And here is the difference, an HO2. So a fuel cell basically takes hydrogen in gaseous form, very, very mildly compressed. The standard today is only 10,000 PSI. That's not a lot of compression. So my car takes a 10,000 PSI fill up. I fill up my car in under 5 minutes, just like you pump gas into your car, except what I'm pumping is hydrogen, and I can go 300 miles. Does that sound like it's better than a Tesla? 300 miles takes me 5 minutes to fill up. And there's 26 gas stations now around the state, more being added every day. Okay? So what happens in a chamber of these fuel cells is it takes ambient oxygen, mixes it with the hydrogen in the tank, and creates an electric release, an electron, and that combination then creates H2O, water. Basically, the best way to wrap this up is for you to understand that there are many smart people exploring these options. Unfortunately, almost all of them work for either a utility or a fossil fuel company. That's the problem. And that's who does most of the talking. When you get time, look at this slide, and you'll see you get a sense of what the global investment is on renewables, et cetera. There is no upper limit, and as you saw on that slide, trillions of dollars are available. Ceres is the most prestigious nonprofit that organizes the advanced thinking of the largest corporations in the world. This is their number right there. The amount of the gap, what they call the gap, right here, is $17 trillion. Now, the nice thing is that gap could be filled well within 10 years or less because there's more than that waiting to be invested. For those of you who don't know about what's going on in the social responsible investing world, it now has globally pushing almost $20 trillion in primarily green investments, just to let you know. It's huge. Hazel Henderson invented the whole industry, and a very good friend of mine, and fellow of the Academy. So what's the Green Energy Moonshot? The Green Energy Moonshot is very simply this. If you could land a man on the moon in 10 years or less, and you don't even know the first thing about how you're going to do it, which Kennedy said he'd do it, how do you do this? Well, what you do is you create microgrids. You can literally deploy them one substation at a time. So it's modular. So you don't have to worry about somebody throwing a giant switch and going from the system that's broken to the system of the future. You literally do it in chunks as fast as you want to go. And the faster you want to go, the faster you'll get there. And the beauty is you save money every step along the way. Every step along the way saves you money. Now, you're going to have to pay off the entrenched political interests, and there are certain ways that that's done now and codified in law, but at the end of the day, it's well worth the price because we have an addiction. We are oil addicts, coal addicts, fossil fuel addicts, and we cannot get to the future if we're going to keep that addiction. The solution is applicable in every community in the world. I want California to help pioneer this. We're doing it now because I get requests. I got one from Rwanda not too long ago because everybody gets in the developing world that the wire is not coming. If you're waiting in a village in India or you're waiting in a village in Africa for the wire to get there, it will never get there. So you don't have an option. And if you are going to rely on these wires that you currently have, when the next hurricane comes through, if you're St. Thomas, St. Croix, if you're Puerto Rico, imagine almost 3.5 million Americans without any power at all, and it may be months before it's restored. That's what the wire brings. It brings delay, inefficiency, and a complete addiction to base power, which by definition is never green.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept and one we intend to win.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
You know, when JFK gave his speech in 1961, he said, "We will land a man on the moon and bring him back safely by the end of the decade." He had no clue of how he could possibly do that. We rose to the occasion, and we in fact did land a man on the moon, and we did bring him back safely by 1969. So our moonshot is 100% renewable California in 10 years or less, no fossil fuels, no nuclear.
The clean energy moonshot is 100% achievable. The reality is that we're not dealing with rocket science. This is far easier than putting a man on the moon.
You're talking more about the cell phone revolution, right? In 1996, no one had a cell phone. By 2006, they had the iPhone.
And the idea is as basic as changing out a 19th century technology. And what we're proposing is that that entire system of grid as you know it be replaced by microgrids. I'm going to just skip forward on this because I'm running out of time, but that video is also available if you'd like it. Again, info@worldbusiness. And it gets better as it goes along. I just wanted you to see that the call to action, though, is we decide to take action. We, you and me. If not us, who? If not now, when? We know what the threat is. The fact that we recycle our garbage won't make a darn bit of difference if we don't solve the fundamental problem of a filthy energy system, and we don't solve the problem of a filthy transportation system. And hydrogen is the one thing that solves both. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and there's no environmental damage done when you create hydrogen. Creating cobalt, for example, to make lithium-ion cobalt batteries is extraordinarily damaging to the environment. Getting rid of them 10 years later is even more destructive to the environment. So what we want to do is to get off of our dependence on mechanical systems of the last century and embrace the future, which is the hydrogen economy. And that's only we can do that if we choose it. But we can do it, and we can do it now. And to quote Winston Churchill, and I'll end on this, Winston Churchill in the middle of the Battle of Britain, and the whole town was in flames, the Germans were bombing them every day, and Churchill comes crawling out of the wreckage, and a reporter runs up and says, Mr. Prime Minister, what shall we do? Hitler stands poised on the channel to invade. London is in flames. What shall we do? And he said, oh, we shall be victorious. And how can you say that when we're in such a mess? He said, the opposite conclusion is absolutely unthinkable. We will do this, because the opposite conclusion is the Permian extinction, and that's absolutely unthinkable. Thank you very much.